Good evening, traveler. Dim the lights. Let the fan hum softly in the background and ease yourself into the warm cocoon of your blanket. Tonight, we're not telling tales of kings or knights or dragons. No, tonight you're waking up like Thomas, age 22, who is basically ancient in the medieval world. Your bed? A pile of itchy straw. Your house? A one-room hut with more holes than walls. Your alarm clock? The wind howling like a banshee through the cracks, and the faint groan of your joints protesting another day of survival. As Thomas blinks awake, every bone in his body whispers, "Not again." There's no time to stretch, no coffee to ease into the day. There's just cold, hunger, and the echo of responsibility. Chickens need feeding, the fire needs wood, and that roof? It's still leaking from last night's rain. You're not special here. You're not the chosen one. You're just one more tired soul in a century that doesn't believe in mercy. But before we dive deeper into Thomas's muddy, miserable morning, take a moment to help this channel grow. If this strange little journey enables you to unwind, please like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always amazing to see how far our sleepy village stretches. And don't forget, tomorrow night, we'll travel somewhere new. Maybe ancient Egypt, maybe a haunted Roman bathhouse. Wherever it is, you won't want to miss it. Thomas is up, sort of. He's halfway between falling off his straw mat and reconsidering the concept of existence entirely. The cold has crept into his bones, into the soles of his feet, up through his spine, and taken up permanent residence behind his eyes. He didn't ask to be here. No one does. But in 1325, free will was more of a rumor than a reality. His eyes flutter open to dying embers' soft, flickering light, casting twisted shadows across the damp floor. There's no snooze button, no heated blanket, and certainly no 5 more minutes. He's sure that if he lies longer, the damp will finish what the cold started. Outside, the wind howls like it has a personal grudge against his roof. And maybe it does. The thatched mess above his head groans with every gust, leaking water from last night's rain into carefully placed buckets that are now full and starting to overflow. The fire's long gone out. There was no warmth, just the faint scent of smoke and desperation. Around him, the rest of the hut's inhabitants, his mother, 2 younger siblings, 1 sleepy goat, and a chicken that refuses to shut up, are still asleep. But not for long. In this world, the day starts, whether you're ready or not. Thomas slowly peels himself off the mat, every joint cracking like a haunted wooden puppet. He's 22, remember? But his back tells a different story. His knees pop as he stands. His neck twinges as he tries to stretch. There's no moment of zen, no deep breath or yoga flow. There's just the reality of survival. He grabs his only cloak, a patchwork horror stitched together from old wool and false hope, and throws it over his shoulders. It's damp. Of course, it's damp. Everything is always wet. His feet touch the ground. He flinches. It's like stepping onto a block of ice. The floor isn't just cold, it's vengeful. And he doesn't have shoes this morning. He had shoes yesterday, or at least something that pretended to be shoes, but one gave out in the mud and the other mysteriously vanished, probably eaten by the goat. Again. Stumbling toward the rickety door, Thomas pushes it open. The wind immediately slaps him in the face with a level of enthusiasm typically reserved for people who insult royalty. The cold rushes in like it owns the place. His cloak flutters like a dying flag, and for a moment, Thomas stands there, letting the bite of winter remind him that he's alive and life is a relentless avalanche of discomfort. The village is stirring. Somewhere, a rooster crows, sounding less like a confident barnyard herald and more like a hungover trumpet. Smoke starts to rise from a few chimneys, if you can call a hole in the roof a chimney. The smell of wet straw, manure, and yesterday's regret hangs heavy in the air. Thomas knows what comes next. He doesn't get to sit down with a hot cup of anything. There's no coffee, there is no breakfast buffet, no microwave leftovers. What he does have is a job. Several, all unpaid. First, the animals, because if the animals die, they all die. The chickens need feed. The goat must be reminded not to eat his sister's tunic again. And the pigs, well, pigs are pigs. They've already knocked over their trough, screaming like tiny, muddy banshees. Thomas trudges through the slop in the yard, his feet sinking into the cold muck, and every step reminds him that socks are a luxury he'll never know. He slips once, catches himself on the edge of the sky, and for a second thinks about just lying in the mud and staying there. It would be warmer, probably quieter too. Feeding the animals is a hands-on, full-sensory experience. There are no gloves, there are no tools, there's just Thomas, a wooden bucket, and a potent smell that should be classified as invasive. The pigs snort appreciatively, the goat headbutts him gently in the knee, and the chickens cluck with the kind of judgment only poultry can convey. When the animals are done screaming, Thomas heads back inside to see if any breakfast crumbs remain. His mother has managed to scrounge a piece of bread that's only partially moldy and a bit of cheese that's harder than the floor. It's not a meal. It's an apology wrapped in calories. He eats slowly, chewing each bite like a negotiation, then gulps down a cup of weak ale because the water is alive with things he doesn't want to meet personally. The bread tastes like bark, the ale tastes like old socks, but it fuels him, barely. And now it's time to get dressed. Not that it makes much difference. Thomas has one outfit. One. A tunic made of coarse wool that itches like betrayal and smells like something died near it, possibly in it. Underwear? Optional. Socks? Mythical. Fashion? Irrelevant. He throws on the tunic, tightens the rope belt that doubles as both the waistband and emotional support, and grabs his tools, each more broken than the last. Outside again, he surveys the fields. The frost is still clinging to the earth like a curse. He sighs, knowing that today will be like yesterday, and tomorrow, and the one after. Hoe in one hand, with dignity long gone, trudges into the dirt to begin turning soil that resents him with tools that mock him for a harvest that may or may not save him. But hey, at least he's not alone. His neighbor, old Gregor, is already out there, coughing up what sounds like a medieval lung and muttering about taxes. And that's the comfort here. Everyone's miserable together. There's no envy, no FOMO. Just mud, cold, and the vague hope that maybe, just maybe, spring will come before the last goat gives up. So, as Thomas swings his rusted hoe into the frozen ground, cursing gently under his breath, he's not thinking about glory. He's thinking about survival and about getting through the next hour, the next breath, the next bite of bark bread. This is the life of a medieval peasant, brutal, thankless, and unrelenting. But it's his life. And today, like every day, Thomas faces it with silent determination, a stiff upper back, and just enough bitterness to make it through. And you? You're just the observer. Snug in your bed, maybe with a warm drink, definitely with indoor plumbing. But tonight, for a few minutes, you walked in Thomas's frozen, muddy footsteps. And guess what? He's just getting started. Thomas, still aching from the morning's battles, both with the animals and his own rebelling joints, knows there's no time to waste. The fire is out, the tools are dull, and the sun hasn't even reached the top of the sky. The day is young, but his body already feels old. There is no sympathy from the land, no pause button. The soil does not care that your back hurts, or that your fingers are numb, or that your breakfast was 2 bites of disappointment and a gulp of regret. He shoulders his hoe, a warped stick with a metal edge so dull it might as well be a spoon, and walks toward the field. It isn't far, but each step through the slushy ground feels like dragging cinder blocks tied to his legs. The mud grips his bare feet like a needy ex, cold, wet, and unwilling to let go. His toes have long gone numb. That's a blessing, really. At least they've stopped hurting. Around him, the world is awake. The village is alive, but barely. Chimneys spit smoke into the gray sky like exhausted sighs. Someone is yelling about a missing pig. Another is arguing over bread crusts. Laughter? Rare. Smiles? Even rarer. The only thing that seems abundant is mud and taxes. Thomas reaches the field. It's not much, just a patch of land he rents from the local lord, a man so wealthy he once threw an entire goose away because it smelled funny. Thomas hasn't eaten meat in 6 months. That goose would have been a feast. He starts to work, stabbing the hoe into the ground with all the force his aching arms can muster. The earth resists. It's still partially frozen, and each hit sends a jolt through his wrists. But he doesn't stop. He can't. If the soil isn't broken, if the seeds aren't planted, there'll be no harvest. And if there's no harvest, there's no food, no rent, no mercy. Hours pass, maybe. Time in the field stretches like stale dough, elastic, sluggish, unkind. Thomas loses track. The sun crawls across the sky, offering light but no warmth. He wipes sweat from his brow, smearing dirt across his face, and takes a breath. It tastes like frost and desperation. Around him, others work too. Silent figures bent double, moving with the rhythm of necessity, not choice. They don't speak, there's no breath to spare for words. He glances at the edge of the field. His little brother, barely tall enough to carry a bucket, is hauling water from the stream. His face is red from cold and effort, his hands shaking slightly, but he doesn't stop. No one tells him to, he just knows. In this world, you learn your role early, and Thomas, he's learned his far too well. By midday, if you can call this dreary light midday, Thomas allows himself a break, not because he wants to, but because if he doesn't, he might collapse. He drops to the ground, knees squishing into the mud, and pulls out what remains of his food, a crust of bread, hard, dry, and as flavorful as a rock. He gnaws on it slowly, more out of obligation than hunger. Food is fuel, nothing more, and this fuel is running out. He leans against a tree, staring at the clouds above. They're thick, low, and ominous. More rain, maybe snow, definitely not sun. The wind picks up, cutting through his cloak like it's not even there. He pulls it tighter, but it doesn't help. Nothing really does. For a moment he lets his eyes close, just for a second. But rest doesn't last long. A distant shout jolts him back. One of the oxen has broken free. Again. Thomas groans, bones protesting, and scrambles to his feet. The ox is halfway across the field, dragging part of the plow behind it like it's trying to escape its own job. He chases after it, slipping twice, finally grabbing its harness and pulling it to a stop. The ox snorts, unimpressed. Thomas whispers a few choice curses under his breath and guides it back. By the time he gets the plow reset, the break he took feels like a dream he barely remembers. The rest of the afternoon blurs. Dirt, sweat, cold, repeat. At one point, Thomas slices his palm on a shard of broken tool. He wraps it in a scrap of cloth and keeps going. Infection? Sure. But what's the alternative? Stop? Let the field win? As the sky begins to darken, the work isn't done. It never is. But the light is fading, and Thomas knows he needs firewood before night falls. He drags himself toward the woods, gathering sticks, fallen branches, anything burnable. He piles them into his arms until he can't carry more. Then he starts the slow walk back. The village smells like smoke and boiled onions. His stomach growls. Dinner is whatever was left over from yesterday's stew, a questionable pottage of roots, herbs, and mystery chunks. He doesn't ask questions. He just eats, each bite lukewarm and gritty. He tries not to think about the rat they caught near the pot last week. After dinner, there are still chores, always chores. The tools need cleaning, well, scraping. The animals need checking. His sister needs help mending her shoes. And then finally, Thomas can collapse onto his straw mat. The fire crackles faintly. His body hurts in places he didn't know existed. But for a moment, lying there in the dark, he feels nothing. Not peace, just the absence of movement. Outside, the wind howls again. The roof groans. A mouse scurries across the floor. The goat sneezes. Thomas closes his eyes. Night has fallen. But rest? That's a luxury Thomas doesn't get to enjoy. Not yet. The sky outside is a deep, bruised purple, with stars peeking through patches of cloud like they're unsure if they want to witness what happens next. The air is colder now, sharper, like it's been waiting all day just to bite him when he lets his guard down. Inside the hut, the fire is down to embers, glowing faintly beneath a cracked pot of something that might be stew, or might just be water pretending to be food. Thomas sits near the hearth, legs stretched out, every muscle humming with dull, overused pain. His hands are scraped and blistered. His left shoulder twitches randomly, thanks to a particularly stubborn chunk of frozen soil earlier. But there's no time to unwind. Before bed, there are still things to do. His mother hands him a small bundle of broken tools, things that should have been replaced seasons ago, but here they are passed down like cursed family heirlooms. A rusted sickle, a cracked handle, a bent nail that used to be part of the fence. He sets to work repairing what he can, using a rock to hammer another rock, muttering under his breath as sparks fly and fingers ache. Each strike is a reminder. There's no hardware store, no spare parts, no call a guy. You're the guy. His little sister sits beside him, silently stitching a rip in her cloak, her needle dancing in and out of the cloth with quiet focus. The only sound is the crackle of the fire, the occasional cough from their father in the corner, and the ever-present wind. It slips in through the cracks, curious and cold, brushing against the back of Thomas's neck like a ghost looking for warmth. Once the repairs are done, or abandoned with a defeated grunt, he checks the roof. Again. It's become routine. The thatch sags in places, weighted down by the week's rain and the occasional squirrel. He presses his hands against it, feeling for weak spots, adjusting a bundle here, stuffing moss into a gap there. It's not pretty. It's not permanent. But it might hold until morning. And that's all that matters. Back inside, the hut is crowded. 8 people, 1 room, and a goat that thinks it's entitled to the warmest spot by the fire. There's no privacy. No bedrooms, just a few straw mats on the floor, a couple of woven blankets, and everyone trying not to elbow each other in the face while sleeping. Thomas spreads his mat in the corner. It's slightly less damp there. He lies down, pulling his thin blanket up to his chin. It smells like smoke and mildew and someone's feet, but it's better than nothing. His body aches in places that feel like they should be someone else's problem. His head is pounding from the cold, from the exhaustion, from the sheer weight of everything he still has to do tomorrow. But sleep doesn't come easy. Not here. Not ever. The wind groans outside like it's trying to get in. The fire pops suddenly, sending a flare of light across the room. Someone snores. Someone else mumbles in their sleep. The goat shifts and grumbles like it's planning a coup. Thomas shifts, trying to get comfortable, but the straw pokes his back like it's judging him. He rolls onto his side, curls into himself, and closes his eyes. And then comes the itch, the fleas. Oh, the fleas. They've made this hut their kingdom. And Thomas? He's the buffet. He scratches absent-mindedly, slapping his leg, his arm, his neck. Nothing helps. You could bathe in lye and they'd still come back. Persistent little demons. At one point, he sits up, slaps his blanket hard enough to startle the goat, and lies back down with a growl. Eventually, somewhere between the 4th reposition and the 50th mental complaint, he drifts into a shallow, unsatisfying sleep. His dreams are chaotic. He's chasing an ox that turns into his landlord. He's stuck in a field of talking wheat. He's trying to eat a loaf of bread that grows teeth and bites back. It's confusing, exhausting, and somehow still better than being awake. But it doesn't last. A crash jolts him awake. The wind's blown something off the roof. Maybe a branch. Maybe part of the roof itself. He blinks in the darkness, disoriented, heart racing. The fire's gone out completely. The only light now comes from the moon, leaking through the cracks like silver fingers. He lies there, eyes open, breath visible in the air. He's tired. Beyond tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what it feels like to be rested. And yet he knows, in just a few hours, he'll be up again, back in the field, back in the cold, back to chasing goats and mending fences and praying that nothing breaks, nothing dies, nothing collapses. And for a moment, lying there in the quiet, surrounded by the steady breathing of his family and the occasional snort from the goat, he feels something strange. Not peace, not contentment, but something close to stubborn hope. The knowledge that as hard as this is, as brutal and unfair and cold as it all feels, he's still here, still standing. Still waking up, still working, still fixing what breaks. Because that's what life is here. A long, slow struggle against the inevitable. You don't win, you endure. And in the world of Thomas, where the roof leaks, the bread is hard, and the future is as uncertain as the fire's next spark, that's enough. He closes his eyes again, letting the wind sing its eerie lullaby, and waits for morning. Morning doesn't arrive so much as it sneaks in, slow, cold, and uninvited. The sky outside is still more dark than light when Thomas's eyes crack open. He didn't really sleep, not fully. It was the kind of half-sleep that leaves your limbs heavier than before and your mind fuzzier than a bucket of spoiled ale. The fire has completely died. No embers, no warmth, just a blackened ring of soot and yesterday's ashes. His body aches. No part of him feels rested. His shoulders throb from hauling firewood. His legs ache from hours hunched in the fields. His hands, they feel like they've been chewed on by wolves and then politely returned. He lifts them to his face, flexing the fingers, inspecting the damage. Blisters, calluses, one tiny cut that definitely wasn't there last night. He doesn't even remember when it happened. That's how most wounds arrive here, in silence. The hut is still quiet. No one else is up yet. His siblings are huddled together like a pile of laundry, still wrapped in threadbare blankets. The goat for once is asleep and not plotting world domination. Thomas rolls onto his side with a groan, his back cracks audibly. He doesn't know if that's good or bad anymore. It just is. And then it hits him. The smell. Not breakfast. Oh no, nothing so comforting. This is the scent of the chamber pot, the family's beloved medieval solution to indoor plumbing. It's full. Of course it is. It always is. And because he's the oldest, guess who gets to deal with it? Thomas sighs. He throws off the blanket, his skin instantly assaulted by the morning chill, and grabs the wooden bucket from the corner with 2 fingers like it's radioactive. Which, honestly, it might as well be. He shuffles outside, bare feet slapping against the cold floor, holding the bucket as far from his body as possible, trying not to breathe. Outside, the village is beginning to wake up. Smoke snakes lazily from a few chimneys. Roosters scream like they're owed money. A dog barks in the distance, followed by a shout that suggests the dog was somewhere it shouldn't have been. The air is damp and heavy, thick with the earthy scent of wet wood, old hay, and whatever the butcher dumped in the ditch last night. Thomas heads toward the designated dumping area, which is just a fancy way of saying that one patch of ground where everyone throws their waste and hopes it disappears. He does the thing, no need for graphic details, and walks back quickly, stomach churning. He tries not to think about it. He always tries, but it's hard when you've just begun your day face to face with medieval sanitation. Back at the hut, his mother is awake. She's already prepping whatever passes for breakfast. It's not much. A few slices of hard bread soaked in water to soften them, maybe some leftover pottage from last night if it hasn't grown something sentient. Thomas accepts his bowl with a nod. The food is bland, but it's warm. And that counts for something. He eats quickly, efficiently, letting the heat seep into his body, pretending for a moment that it's enough. Then it's time to get dressed, which is funny because he never really undressed. He sleeps in what he wears, mostly because taking clothes off means freezing to death. His tunic is stiff from yesterday's sweat and mud. His cloak still smells like damp goat and regret. He pulls on his boots, still wet from yesterday's trek through the field, and instantly regrets it. The squish of cold leather around his toes is worse than waking up. It's like starting the day with a handshake from winter itself. There's no time to dwell. Work waits. He grabs his tools, still dull, still broken, and heads out. The fields aren't forgiving. They never are. The ground is harder today, the cold having stiffened the earth like stone. His fingers go numb around the handle of the hoe as he begins the day's first task, clearing the frost-bitten weeds from the far corner of the plot. The work is tedious, repetitive, painful, but necessary. Every weed pulled is one less threat to the crops that may or may not feed them this year. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time bends strangely in the field. The sun barely crests over the horizon, casting long, bleak shadows across the village. Thomas's breath fogs in front of him, his body covered in layers of mud, sweat, and aching. He pauses to stretch, wincing at the pull in his back, then glances over toward the other end of the field. There's movement. It's his neighbor, Gregor, pulling a broken cart with one hand and swearing at a wheel with the other. The cart is loaded with firewood, likely scavenged from the nearby forest, and it's clear the wheel is about to fall off. Again, Thomas considers helping, but his own list of tasks is longer than the cart is wide, and Gregor looks like the kind of man who prefers yelling at objects over actual assistance. So he returns to work. Later, around midday, Thomas takes a short break, not because he wants to, because he has to. His legs are shaking, his lips are cracked. His hands look like they've been in a bar fight with a blackberry bush. He sits on the edge of a rock and eats his second meal of the day, bread again, drier this time. He tries to chew slowly to make it last. It doesn't work. The bread is gone in 2 bites, leaving only the memory of texture and a bit of grit between his teeth. He sips weak ale from a wooden flask, swishing it around to rinse the dirt from his mouth. It tastes like old grass and sadness, but at least it's not water. That's full of things you don't want to meet on an empty stomach. Then it's back to it. More digging, more hauling, more mud. His boots squelch with every step, the sound almost mocking. His tunic sticks to his back like it's plotting to strangle him. His arms burn, his knees wobble, but he keeps moving. Because if he stops, the work piles up. And there's no one else to do it. There's no rotation, no shift change, just Thomas and the field. A partnership forged in mutual hatred. By the time the sun begins to dip, he's only halfway done. But that doesn't matter. Because when you live like Thomas, the work is never really done. You just stop when the light disappears, or when you collapse, whichever comes first. The sun is setting now, slow and reluctant, bleeding gold and ash into the sky like it's apologizing for everything it failed to do today. Thomas wipes the sweat and dirt from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, though it only makes things worse. The sleeve is soaked, gritty, and smells like a damp barn mixed with burnt porridge. But he doesn't have time to care. The light is fading and there's still more to do. He drags the dull hoe behind him like a weapon in some kind of tragic agricultural war. His arms feel like rope, frayed and splintering. His knees wobble with each step, threatening betrayal. And his lower back, that's a battlefield of its own. Every movement is a reminder that his body has been at war with the land since the moment he woke up, and it's losing. He makes it back to the hut just as the last sliver of sunlight slips behind the hills. The door creaks open, and he's immediately met with the familiar mix of smells: wet wool, burnt onions, wood smoke, and the ghost of yesterday's goat stew. The fire has been coaxed back to life, flickering weakly in the hearth like it's afraid to try too hard. His mother is stirring something in the pot, and by the look on her face, it's just enough to keep everyone from collapsing. Barely. Thomas drops his tools near the wall with a thud that echoes like a groan. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. The silence speaks louder than words. His father nods in his direction, acknowledgement, approval, and sympathy, all wrapped into one small movement. His siblings are already seated on the floor around the fire, bowls in hand, waiting like little shadows. He joins them, easing himself down onto the cold earth with a wince. His legs scream, his shoulders slump, and his eyes burn from smoke and exhaustion. His mother ladles the stew into his bowl. It's thinner than yesterday. More water, less mystery meat, maybe a chunk of potato if he's lucky. He stirs it with his spoon, watching the surface ripple like a muddy pond. Then he eats, slowly, quietly. Every bite is work, every swallow an effort. No one talks much during dinner. Words require energy. Energy is expensive. After the meal, the routine begins again. It's like muscle memory at this point, mechanic avoidable. The fire needs more wood. The tools must be wiped down and stored. The animals checked. Even at the end of the day, the work whispers from every corner. Thomas forces himself to his feet, grunting softly as his joints complain, and heads outside with a bundle of straw to lay in the pen. The wind bites harder now, sharp and unkind. The stars are out, cold and silent above the village. The moon hangs like a broken coin, half there and half gone. He checks the goat, who seems to be chewing on something that was once a shirt. He shoos it gently, replaces its bedding, and makes sure the latch on the pen holds. The pigs are snoring. The chickens, mercifully, are asleep. Back inside, the hut is warmer, but barely. His siblings are already settling into their sleeping spots, thin mats of straw and the occasional folded cloak. The fire crackles weakly, trying its best. Thomas removes his boots, peels off his cloak, and stretches out on his mat. His muscles protest again. His bones feel older than time. But sleep doesn't come quickly. His eyes remain open, staring at the roof above, the same roof he patched with moss and blind hope just a week ago. It still leaks when it rains. The wind still finds its way in, but it hasn't collapsed yet. And that's something. He listens to the sounds around him. His brother breathing heavily, the creak of the wood as someone shifts, the soft rustle of the fire, and the occasional pop of a spark. There's comfort in the familiarity of it all. Even the discomfort is predictable now. The ache in his back, the sting in his hands, the tightness in his shoulders, they're part of him, like old friends that never leave. His mind drifts. He thinks about the tools that need sharpening, about the section of fence that's sagging, about the growing season coming fast and the seeds they barely have enough of. He thinks about the tax collector who'll arrive in a few weeks, demanding coins they don't have, threatening consequences no one wants to hear out loud. He thinks about how tired he is. Not just today tired, but all the time tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your breath and hides behind your ribs. The kind of tired you can't sleep away. Still, he's here, still breathing, still going. Outside, a dog barks once, far away. Then silence again. The village sleeps. Or tries to. Thomas closes his eyes, willing himself to rest, because tomorrow isn't optional. The world doesn't pause, the frost doesn't care, the fields don't wait, and neither does the dawn. As he finally begins to slip into that hazy, aching space between wakefulness and whatever passes for sleep in his world, he hears the faintest sound, a drip from the corner of the roof. It's begun to leak again. He exhales through his nose. Of course it has. But he doesn't get up. Not yet, because tomorrow he'll fix it. Just like he always does. Morning comes again. Not with grace, not with warmth, but with that same old gray punch to the face. Thomas opens his eyes slowly, blinking into the dim, cold haze of the hut. The fire died sometime in the night. Again. He's shivering before he even sits up, and when he moves, his muscles scream like they've been betrayed. Every bone, every joint, every tendon feels like it's made of old wood left out in the rain. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. No one in the room has the energy for words. His siblings are curled together under the thinnest blanket civilization has ever produced, still asleep but twitching like they're already dreaming of the fields. His mother is already up, as always, wrapped in 2 shawls and crouched near the fire pit, trying to coax life from a few stubborn coals. Thomas swings his legs over the side of his mat and places his feet on the ground, and immediately regrets it. It's not a floor, it's an insult. A slab of frozen earth so cold it feels wet. He jerks his toes back instinctively, but it's no use. He has to stand. The day doesn't wait. The animals are already stirring outside, and the chickens, bless their cursed little beaks, have started their morning performance. He grits his teeth and stands up. His tunic clings to him, cold and slightly damp, like a towel that's been left in a barn. He pulls his cloak over his shoulders and steps into his boots. They're stiff, ice-crusted, not entirely dry from 2 days ago. He doesn't care. He doesn't have the time to care. He just grabs a bundle of hay and heads outside to face the beast. The wind hits him immediately, cold, sharp, and bitter. It rushes through the village like a pack of angry ghosts, slipping through every crack and seam in every house, nipping at skin, stealing warmth. The sky is gray. The kind of gray that makes you think the sun called in sick. Clouds hang low, heavy with the promise of snow or rain or some new creative misery. Thomas walks toward the animal pen, eyes watering from the cold, hay tucked under his arm. The ground is hard again, frozen in ruts and footprints. He slips once, nearly twists his ankle, but catches himself just in time to avoid planting his face in last night's pig leftovers. The goats bleat at him like he's late, which technically he is. They don't care. They're hungry. The chickens flap and strut, demanding food with the self-importance of royalty. He feeds them all in silence, moving from pen to coop, refilling troughs with numb fingers, breaking ice off the water buckets with the heel of his boot. One of the pigs has gotten out. Of course it has. It's halfway across the yard, snuffling through the ashes near the woodpile, clearly proud of its prison break. Thomas groans and jogs, stumbles. After it, slipping again, grabbing it by its muddy, squealing body and dragging it back toward the pen. Every morning, he mutters. Every cursed morning. The pig resists. They always resist. They don't know They don't know taxes or famine or feudalism, but they know exactly how to make a grown man look ridiculous. He finally wrestles it inside, rehooks the gate with trembling fingers, and kicks the mud off his boot. And that's when he hears it, the bell. Distant. Hollow. Coming from the chapel at the center of the village. It's not Sunday, which means it's not a call to prayer, which means something is wrong. He freezes. Every villager knows that sound. It's the bell they ring when there's trouble, when someone's sick or missing, or worse. Thomas drops the empty hay bucket and heads toward the square. Others are emerging from their homes, hunched against the cold, faces tight with suspicion and fear. No one says anything yet, just that shared, grim understanding, that ripple of dread. At the chapel steps stands the village elder. He looks tired, pale. His voice cuts through the cold. Another one's gone, young Emmerich, the miller's boy. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Thomas feels something drop in his stomach. He knew Emmerich. Everyone did. He was 16, strong, healthy. Just last week, he'd been chasing chickens through the square, laughing like a fool. Now, gone. No one says dead, not yet, but everyone knows what that means. The fever has come back. Thomas clenches his jaw. The fever had swept through once 2 winters ago, claimed a dozen in 1 week, left others weak for months. They thought it was over, hoped it was over. It wasn't. The elder gives instructions: stay warm, boil your water, avoid close gatherings. But it's hollow advice. Everyone here knows it won't help much. The huts are too small, the food too scarce, the cold too strong. Illness doesn't need a welcome, it lets itself in. Thomas walks back to his home, slower now, colder, not from the wind, but from the weight. The creeping realization that things could get worse, that all the hard work, the daily fight just to survive, might not be enough. Inside, his mother looks up from the hearth. She sees it on his face. She knows. She doesn't ask, just nods and returns to stirring the pot. The kids stay quiet. Even the goat lies down in the corner. Thomas sits, doesn't speak, just stares at the fire. Tomorrow, it might be someone else. Tomorrow, it might be him. But today, he's still breathing. And in this world, that's the only victory you get. The next morning doesn't ask permission to arrive. It just does, without warmth, without warning, without a single ounce of mercy. Thomas wakes up to a dull ache behind his eyes and the sharp, metallic taste of fear still lingering in his mouth. Emmerich's name echoes in the back of his mind like a ghost he can't shake. The village hasn't spoken much since the bell rang. They don't need to. Fear, when thick enough, doesn't require conversation. It sits in the air like smoke, unseen but choking. He doesn't want to get up. For a moment, just a moment, he considers staying right where he is, wrapped in a damp wool blanket that smells faintly of mildew and goat. But that's not how this world works. There are animals to feed, water to haul, wood to chop. Hunger doesn't wait for grief, and the land certainly doesn't pause for sorrow. He sits up slowly, wincing as his spine clicks like old wood. The floor is even colder today, if that's possible, more frozen earth than anything resembling home. His cloak feels like it's made of ice and regret. The fire has burned out again, leaving nothing but blackened wood and a few stubborn sparks hiding beneath the ash. He steps outside. The sky is bone white and quiet, the kind of sky that promises snow, maybe soon, maybe too soon. A few other villagers are out, walking slower than usual, heads down. No one makes eye contact. They're all thinking the same thing. Who's next? Thomas heads for the chicken coop first. It's a small, crooked thing with slanted walls and a door that refuses to stay shut unless bribed with a rock. The chickens are agitated this morning, clucking and flapping like something spooked them. He tosses in feed, collects what eggs haven't frozen, and mutters to himself just to hear his own voice. It feels like reassurance, like proof he's still here. Next is the goat. Still chewing, still plodding, still alive. One win. He hauls water from the stream, the bucket handle biting into his fingers like frozen teeth. The stream hasn't iced over yet, but it's getting close. He has to crack through the top layer with a stick. His hands go numb within seconds. The walk back to the hut feels 10 times longer, water sloshing, muscles screaming. He can't feel his fingertips. He doesn't even care anymore. His mother is waiting near the hearth. She takes the water, says nothing, just nods. Her eyes are tired. More than tired. Haunted. There's a strange tightness around her mouth that tells Thomas what she won't say. One of the neighbors is sick. Again. He doesn't ask who. Breakfast is small, a crust of bread warmed over the fire and rubbed with garlic. No one talks while they eat. His younger brother stares into the fire like it's going to offer answers. His sister picks at the edges of her bowl, lips pale, shoulders trembling. It's not just the cold. It's something deeper. After breakfast, Thomas heads out to the fields, but he's not planting. Not today. The elder has called for all able-bodied men to help fortify the village well. If the fever spreads through the water, they're all doomed. So Thomas grabs his tools, shovel, hammer, what's left of a rope, and trudges through the frost-covered mud toward the center of town. The work is brutal. Digging in frozen ground is like trying to break rock with your bare hands. The shovel clinks off stone, the wooden handle jarring his wrists. He works next to Gregor, the butcher's son, who says nothing but grunts every few minutes, mostly at the dirt, sometimes at life. Sweat forms on Thomas's neck despite the cold. His hands bleed. He doesn't stop. Midway through the morning, a shout goes up from the south road. Everyone freezes. A figure stumbles into view. A woman, cloaked in brown, coughing hard, leaning on a stick. Her eyes are sunken, her skin is gray. No one moves. Then someone shouts, "She's from the next village, they're sick!" Panic erupts. People scatter, some running, some yelling for the elder, others just backing away with wide, terrified eyes. Thomas doesn't move, he just watches. Watches as they usher her to the edge of the village and leave her there outside the gates. A bowl of water, a piece of bread. No one dares touch her. She doesn't protest, she just sits. and coughs and waits. By mid-afternoon, the air grows heavier. Clouds roll in thick and dark, pressing down like a warning. Thomas keeps working until his arms shake, until his fingers refuse to close, until the rope burns his palms raw. When he finally returns home, he's too tired to eat, too tired to speak. He just drops onto the mat beside the fire and stares at the ceiling. It's leaking again, a slow drip, drip, drip that's found its rhythm. Across the room, his sister coughs. Once, twice, 3 times. Everyone hears it. No one says anything. Thomas stares at the fire until the flames blur, until the sound of the drip is all he can hear, until his eyelids fall shut, not because he's at peace, but because his body has nothing left to give. He dreams of fields that never end, of goats that speak, of bells that ring and never stop. And somewhere in that dream, Emmeric's voice whispers his name. The cough doesn't go away. It's soft at first, just a whisper in the dark. But then it comes again and again, louder now, hungrier. Thomas lies there, eyes wide open, staring at the leaky ceiling, counting the drips, trying to pretend he didn't hear it. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe she's just cold. Maybe it's the smoke. Maybe... No, he knows better. Everyone in the village does. Coughing doesn't mean smoke. Coughing means the fever. And once the fever's in the house, it's like letting a wolf into a chicken coop and hoping it only eats the lazy ones. He turns his head slowly. His sister, wrapped in the family's warmest blanket, one that still smells faintly of mold and smoke, shivers beside the fire. Her cheeks are flushed, too flushed, and her eyes glisten unnaturally in the firelight. She blinks at him, tries to smile. It doesn't work. Their mother is already beside her, placing a hand on her forehead, then slowly pulling it away. Her face doesn't change, but her hands start moving faster. She throws more wood into the fire, grabs a cloth, wets it in lukewarm water, and presses it to the girl's forehead. No one says the word. No one dares. Thomas sits up, every muscle protesting. He feels like an old tree uprooting itself after a storm, stiff and splintering. But fear outruns exhaustion every time. He crosses the room and kneels beside his sister, studying her face. She looks so small. Not just younger, smaller, like the fever is already shrinking her, curling her in on herself, making her disappear by degrees. The rest of the hut is silent. His younger brother is watching, wide-eyed, clutching the corner of his mat. The goat has backed into a shadowy corner, for once understanding that now is not the time for bleeding and rebellion. Thomas's father, who rarely speaks more than 10 words a day, clears his throat. "We need herbs. From Marta." The room stills. Marta, the village herbalist, the old woman who lives near the edge of the woods, who knows every root, every leaf, every secret the land refuses to share easily. But visiting her comes with a price. Not in coin, but in courage. People say she doesn't age, that she talks to trees, that her cures work only if you believe in them, that sometimes they work even when you don't. But Thomas doesn't care about stories, not now. He grabs his cloak, his boots, and a torch, and without another word, steps into the night. The wind has teeth tonight. It howls through the village like it's trying to erase it. Every step Thomas takes crunches on frozen earth. The torch barely holds against the wind, flickering like a dying star. The sky above is choked with clouds. No moon, no stars, just endless black. The village is asleep, or pretending to be. Windows are shuttered tight, doors barred. No one wants to admit they know what's happening, that the fever has found another home, that it's knocking on their neighbor's wall and might come knocking on theirs next. Thomas moves quickly, slipping past the square, past the chapel, down the narrow path toward the woods. His breath fogs in front of him. His hands are shaking. Not from the cold. He doesn't stop until he sees it. A small hut, crooked and half swallowed by trees. Light seeps from under the door, yellow and flickering. He knocks once, nothing. Twice. A creak. The door opens an inch. Marta stares at him, eyes sharp as thorns, wrapped in layers of shawls and mystery. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. "My sister," Thomas says, voice raw. "She's burning." Still no reply. He reaches into his cloak, pulls out the only thing he has of value, a pendant made of brass, nothing fancy, but it was his father's once. He holds it out. Marta takes it, studies it, then steps back. Thomas follows. Inside, her home smells of damp leaves and crushed herbs, of smoke and something older, something earthen and heavy. She moves silently, gathering jars, bundles, bark. Her fingers move like she's playing a memory. He watches, too afraid to ask what any of it means. She pours something into a satchel, ties it tight, and hands it to him. Boil this, make her drink, 3 times. He nods. And if it doesn't work, he asks, even though he knows the answer. Marta looks at him, eyes sad, voice low. Then she goes where Emmerich went. No more words. He runs back through the village, daft, lungs aching, legs numb, heart hammering against his ribs like it's trying to escape. He bursts through the door, drops the satchel, and his mother is already boiling water. They steep the herbs. The smell fills the room, bitter, sharp like forest and iron. His sister drinks. Barely. She coughs, then sleeps. Hours pass. The fire burns low. No one sleeps. Thomas sits by her side, holding her hand, watching her chest rise and fall, and for the first time in days, he prays. Not loudly, not with words, just with hope. Raw, desperate, clinging. The kind of hope you find at the very bottom of things. The kind that doesn't make promises, but keeps you breathing. The fever doesn't leave. Not yet. It lingers like smoke in the rafters, like a shadow that refuses to step back into the dark. Thomas hasn't slept in 2 nights. He's not sure how he's still upright. His eyes are dry and hot, burning every time he blinks. His body is weak, but he stays close to her, watching, waiting. His sister stirs beneath the blanket, thin and damp from sweat. Her skin is pale now, a contrast to the raging heat radiating from her body. Her breath comes in quick, shallow bursts, like she's trying to race something only she can see. Her lips tremble when she murmurs in her sleep. Nonsense, mostly. Fragments of songs, memories, maybe dreams. Thomas leans in closer, hoping for something, anything, that sounds like improvement. But the truth is, he doesn't know what improvement looks like anymore. His mother hasn't left the hearth. She stokes the fire constantly, feeds it wood like she's feeding a god that demands warmth in exchange for mercy. His younger brother sits against the far wall, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. He hasn't spoken since yesterday, maybe longer. Fear has taken up too much space inside them. It's hard to fit words in there too. The village is quieter than usual. No bells, no visitors, no footsteps outside the door. It's as if everyone is holding their breath. Thomas hears rumors during his water runs, quiet whispers traded between clenched teeth and furrowed brows. 3 more sick, 1 gone in the night, another family refusing to open their door. The fever's grip is tightening. It moves without pattern, without rules. 1 house spared, the next decimated. Some say it's in the water, some say it's the wind, others that it's punishment, though no one can agree on what for. He doesn't believe in punishment. He believes in survival. And right now, survival looks like doing everything, anything, to keep his sister's lungs moving. He boils Marta's herbs 3 times a day, forces the bitter brew between her lips. She chokes, gags, swallows, sleeps, wakes, cries. He holds her hand through all of it, doesn't let go, not once. His fingers are cracked from the cold, from the work, but they're steady when they're wrapped around hers. On the 3rd night, the worst comes. She starts to convulse. It happens fast. One moment, she's still. The next, her body arches, shakes violently. Her eyes roll back, her breath catches. Thomas panics. He grabs her, tries to hold her still, calls for his mother. His heart is thudding so loudly he can barely hear his own voice. His mother rushes over, tries to hold her head, to steady her arms, whispering prayers that stumble over her tongue. And then it stops. She goes limp. Silent, too silent. Thomas presses his ear to her chest, waits. 1 second, 2, then breath. Shallow, but there. He exhales so hard it feels like he might fall apart. They clean her, wrap her in a dry blanket, change the herbs. Thomas doesn't let go of her hand, not even when his muscles cramp, not even when his vision blurs, not even when the fire burns low and the night outside deepens into something almost unreal. Sometime before dawn, she speaks. Just a word. Cold. Thomas leans in. You're cold? She nods. Just barely. His mother moves instantly, layering another shawl over her. Thomas rubs her arms gently, careful not to startle her. It's the first real sign. She's still sick, burning up, weak, barely able to whisper, but she's present. Conscious, aware. And that's everything. The next day is the slowest Thomas has ever lived. He doesn't go to the fields, doesn't fetch water, doesn't even eat. He just sits with her. She drinks more of the brew, opens her eyes a few more times. Once, she even smiles, small, crooked, but real. Hope begins to stretch its limbs again. Cautiously, quietly. Outside, the wind has softened. The clouds have started to break, letting through thin strands of winter sunlight. The village is still tense, still sick, but there's talk of recovery now. Talk of those who made it through. Marta passes by that afternoon. She doesn't knock, just leaves a small bundle at the door. Fresh herbs, new instructions. A sign maybe that she believes the girl still has a chance. Thomas picks up the bundle, presses it to his chest for a second, and lets out a long, shaky breath. That night, he dreams for the first time in days. He dreams of spring, of green, of laughter, of his sister chasing chickens again, barefoot and shouting, of the field growing full and bright, of the roof no longer leaking, of warmth that doesn't come with a cost. He knows it's a dream, but for once, it doesn't feel like a lie. Morning comes slowly, like it's not sure it should return. Light seeps through the cracks in the wooden walls, soft and hesitant, casting long shadows on the dirt floor. The fire is low, but still alive, flickering quietly in its bed of ash. Thomas wakes up to silence, not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that holds its breath. He doesn't move right away. For a moment, he just stares at the ceiling, listening. His sister's breathing is steady. Not perfect, not strong, but steady. Each rise and fall of her chest is a small miracle wrapped in exhaustion. She's still warm, not burning, not shaking, just warm. He sits up slowly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hands, feeling the grime, the ache, the weight of everything they've survived. Around him, the hut is still. His mother is asleep beside the hearth, curled up like a question mark, a ladle still in her hand. His younger brother lies on the other side of the room, arms wrapped around himself, dreaming something that makes him twitch. Thomas rises carefully, steps over the creaky floorboards, and grabs his cloak. The cold bites at him immediately. It never left, but now it feels sharper, like it knows he's vulnerable. He steps outside. The village is quiet. No birds, no carts, no children laughing, just the wind whispering through the bare trees and the occasional cough echoing from a distant hut. The world feels thinner, like the fabric of it has worn down, thread by thread, and no one has the strength to mend it. He walks down the path toward the stream, bucket in hand, boots crunching over frost-covered ground. Every step is heavier than it should be. He's not just tired, he's hollowed out, scraped clean by fear and sleepless nights. But he keeps moving, because that's what you do. You move, you carry, you endure. At the stream, he kneels, breaks the thin crust of ice with the edge of the bucket as cup, and scoops the water carefully. His reflection stares back at him, older somehow, harder. His cheeks are sunken, his eyes ringed with shadows, but they're still his, and they're still open. Back at the hut, his sister is awake. Barely. Her eyes flutter open when he enters, and for a second she looks at him like she recognizes him. Then she closes them again and drifts back into sleep. But that second, just that one, feels like sunlight after a month of rain. He sets the water down, kneels by her side, and brushes a strand of hair from her forehead. "You're still here," he whispers. Later, as the sun rises higher and the village begins to stir, the elder walks through the center of town calling for a meeting. No bell this time, just his voice. Rough and hoarse, shouting names. Thomas goes. He leaves his sister in their mother's care, wraps his cloak tighter, and heads to the square. A few dozen villagers gather, faces pale, eyes wary, bodies wrapped in whatever warmth they could find. The elder stands near the old well, a scroll in hand, his breath visible in the cold morning air. "We've lost 14, he says simply. 7 more are sick, but the fever is slowing." A murmur rises. Relief, maybe, or disbelief. "We need to rebuild," the elder continues. "We need to replant. We need to prepare. Spring will come, and when it does, we must be ready." Rebuilding. The word feels almost absurd. Thomas thinks of his sister, still too weak to sit up. He thinks of Emmerich, already buried. Of the empty huts, the silent dinners, the dreams that never made it past the coughing. But then he thinks of the herbs Marta left. Of the way his sister whispered cold and then asked for water. Of the pot bubbling on the fire. Of Marta's gnarled hands tying a bundle with care. Maybe rebuilding isn't absurd. Maybe it's necessary. The elder assigns tasks: wood gathering, thatch repairs, seed counting. Thomas volunteers for the stream patrol. It's not glamorous. It means walking miles up and down the banks, clearing out debris, checking for signs of tainted water. But it gets him out of his head, out of the house. The stream is half frozen, clogged with dead branches and fallen leaves. He wades in where he can, boots slipping on the slick stones, fingers numb from the cold. He doesn't think about the past days, not much. He focuses on the flow. on the work, on the way the water sounds against the rocks. He finds a broken pipe near the mill, jammed with silt. He clears it, fixes the connection with a bit of cloth and prayer. It's not perfect, but the water starts to move again. That night, back at the hut, his sister sits up for the first time, only for a few minutes, but it's enough. She smiles at him. Weak, tired, but real. "Did you fix the roof?" she asks. He laughs. Actually laughs. It startles everyone in the room. "Not yet," he says. "But I will." The fire crackles, the wind howls outside, the hut is still cold, still cracked, still full of ghosts, but inside, there's a little more light, a little more warmth, and for the first time in a long time, a little more hope. The days grew longer, but the frost still clung to the ground like it was trying to make a point. Thomas stood outside, boots buried in mud that hadn't quite decided if it wanted to stay frozen or melt into something worse. The air held a faint promise of spring. Birds sang somewhere out of sight, but the wind still bit like it owed you money. That's how this season worked. Not quite winter, not quite anything else. Just gray skies, wet socks, and hope disguised as hard labor. Back in the village, people were beginning to return to something that looked like normal. Not the old normal, too many empty chairs for that, but a new one, stitched together with grief, stubbornness, and whatever strength they could scavenge. Children were laughing again. Chickens were once again where they weren't supposed to be. Even the goats, sullen for weeks, had resumed their full-time mischief. Inside Thomas's home, the hearth burned steady. His sister, thinner now but undeniably alive, sat cross-legged near the fire, untangling a mess of wool and thread like it owed her an apology. Her cough was mostly gone. Her strength wasn't all the way back, but her smile came easier, and that alone was worth more than gold. Thomas passed her a bowl of thin soup. She took it with a nod, sipping carefully. "It doesn't taste like burnt bark anymore," she said. "That's because we ran out of bark," he grinned. "You're welcome." Their mother smirked from the corner, cutting onions like they were responsible for every wrong in her life. Even the goat in the corner seemed more agreeable today, chewing on something that was, thankfully, not someone's shoe. But outside, work never stopped. The fever had left holes, in families, in routines, in the field rows that hadn't been tilled on time. There were fewer hands now. That meant more for everyone else to do. Thomas shouldered a sack of grain, making his way down the muddy path toward the communal storage. The air smelled like thawing earth and desperation. A few other villagers were ahead of him. Gregor, old Anna, even that lazy mason who usually avoided sunlight like it was contagious. They weren't talking, but they moved with purpose. The village elders stood waiting near the granary, a hand-drawn map of planting plots spread across a barrel like it was a war plan. And in a way, it was. They weren't just growing food this season, they were rebuilding life. "We're short on seed," the elder said, "short on bodies, too." Thomas nodded. "Tell me what you need." "You sure?" The elder raised an eyebrow. "You've already got 3 fields." "Add another," Thomas replied. "We either plant or starve. I'd rather sweat than beg." The elder didn't smile, but he scratched something onto the parchment and gave Thomas a rough pat on the shoulder. "Good man." And so the days began to bleed together. Thomas rose before the sun, hands already aching from yesterday's work, and pushed through the wind and mud like a man on borrowed time. He tilled. He sowed. He repaired fences that no longer stood, fixed roofs that sagged like tired backs, and patched boots that should have been buried years ago. Every now and then he'd stop, just for a moment, and look up at the sky. It was still gray, still uncertain, but sometimes he'd catch a sliver of blue, a break in the clouds, and it felt like a secret message from the universe. "You're still here. Keep going." At night, the village gathered again, not for mourning this time, but to share stories, food, laughter. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just quiet company, but it was enough. Enough to remind them that they hadn't broken. Bent, maybe, bruised, scarred for sure, but not broken. One night, as Thomas sat by the fire, his sister leaned over and handed him something. It was a small woven bracelet, rough but carefully done, the kind of thing a child might make for a festival. "I started it when I thought I wouldn't get better," she said quietly. "Figured you'd need something to remember me by." Thomas stared at it for a long time, then slipped it onto his wrist. "I don't need this to remember," he said, "but I'll wear it anyway." Spring eventually arrived, for real this time. The trees bloomed like they'd been waiting for their cue. The grass pushed its way through the thawing earth. Birds returned with scandalous songs, and in the fields, shoots of green stretched toward the sun, defiant and determined. Thomas stood in the middle of his fourth plot, hands on his hips, back aching, boots caked in mud. He looked at the rows of tiny plants, barely sprouted, and smiled. This was survival made visible. This was grief turned into growth. This was what it meant to fight back, not with swords or speeches, but with shovels, seeds, and the refusal to give up. The fever would be remembered, the dead would not be forgotten, but life, as it always did, had found a way forward, and so had they. The first true warmth of spring didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no grand announcement, no choir of birds, no sudden explosion of green. It came gradually, so slow you could almost miss it. A softer breeze, a patch of stubborn frost finally giving way, a single bloom pushing up through the thawed soil like it had been waiting all winter for permission. Thomas noticed it most in the mornings. He'd step out of the hut, wrapped in his worn-out cloak, and instead of being greeted by biting wind and icy breath, the air felt gentle. Not warm exactly, but kinder. The earth was still damp, still cold, but it no longer fought every footstep. And in the village, something had shifted. The people had survived the plague. Barely. They had buried their dead, patched their roofs, and returned to the soil like it owed them answers. No one said it out loud, but the silence had changed. It was no longer filled with dread, it was filled with determination. Rebirth always came quietly. The council had called a meeting, this time not to discuss rations or illness, but something different. Celebration. It sounded absurd at first. A celebration? After all that loss? After the nights of fevered prayers, the sound of coughing echoing through thin walls, the shared terror of watching loved ones slip away? But Thomas understood. He understood it the moment the elder asked him to speak. "We've all watched you," the elder said, "through the worst of it. You didn't break. You led. Your story is theirs now. Speak for them." He didn't sleep the night before the gathering, not out of fear, but because his mind wouldn't quiet. How do you speak for a village, for those still here and those who never will be again? When morning came, the village square was filled. There was no fanfare, no music, just people standing close, holding hands or tokens of memory. Wreaths woven from new grass, small carved stones, ribbons dyed with natural inks. The sky was a perfect blue, the kind you get only after months of gray. Thomas stepped onto the makeshift platform, his palms sweating, heart pounding. He looked out at the crowd, saw faces he knew intimately, some etched with grief, some lit with tentative smiles. He took a breath. "When the fever came, we didn't know if we'd survive," he said, voice low but clear. "We lost so much, and we'll carry that loss forever. But we also found something. In the worst of times, we saw the best in each other. When fear said run, we stayed. When despair said stop, we moved. When silence screamed, we listened." He paused. The wind stirred, lifting the ends of his cloak. This isn't just a village anymore, it's a memory, a promise, a reminder that even when everything is taken, what we build together can't be broken. This gathering isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering and moving forward. The silence that followed was heavy, full. Then someone clapped, then another, and another. Soon the square was filled with the sound of applause, not loud, not wild, but steady, respectful, real. Afterward, people stayed. They talked, shared food, cried, laughed. It felt like something ancient had cracked open and released its breath, like the village had been holding something in, and now finally it could exhale. Later that night, Thomas sat with his sister by the fire. "You spoke like you've been doing it for years," she teased, sipping her tea. "I was terrified," he admitted. "But you were honest," she replied. "That's what matters." She was stronger now. Her color had returned, her voice no longer rasped, and the light in her eyes, once dulled by fever, now danced again. Outside, fireflies began their nightly dance. A dog barked in the distance. The sounds of rebuilding, of life, had returned. But Thomas wasn't thinking about speeches or applause anymore. He was thinking about what came next, because surviving wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And this village, these people, they weren't just trying to get back to what they had before. They were building something new, something better. Spring had made its promise, but it was summer that kept it. By the time the days grew long and golden, the village had shaken off much of its wariness. Fields were green again, buzzing with insects and hope. The trees stood tall, thick with leaves, casting lazy shadows over the paths once slick with frost and fear. But no one forgot that kind of memory of sickness, loss, and whispered prayers in the dark never leaves. It just settles deeper, like roots under the surface. Thomas felt the shift most in his bones. Not because of age, he was still young by any measure, but because carrying the weight of survival changes a person. There's no going back to who you were before, only becoming someone new. The gathering weeks before had felt like closure, but what followed was something different, something he hadn't expected. New beginnings, babies born, young lovers sneaking glances again, laughter, not forced but natural. And in the middle of it all, Thomas found himself becoming something he hadn't imagined, a leader. Not because he asked for it, not because he shouted loudest, but because when things fell apart, he stayed. When others wavered, he worked. And now people listened when he spoke, asked for his opinion, looked to him during planning meetings for the harvest. At first, he resisted it. Leadership was for older men, wiser ones, men with gray in their beards and stories that lasted all night. But the elder approached him one afternoon while Thomas was balancing on the barn roof, hammer in one hand, a thatch bundle under his arm. "You ever think of sitting with the council?" the elder asked, shielding his eyes from the sun. Thomas blinked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Me? Why?" The elder chuckled, not unkindly. "Because when you speak, people stop what they're doing and listen." Thomas thought about that all evening. Not because he wanted power, he didn't, but because for the first time, he realized he had something worth sharing. Not knowledge exactly, but experience. And grit, so he agreed. And things changed. His days were still filled with labor, fields don't till themselves. But now there were meetings, discussions, even debates about the future. About trade, education, medicine. The council wanted to prepare not just survive, but thrive. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, disagreements about which crops to prioritize, how to ration, who deserved more for giving more. But Thomas spoke plainly, from the heart, and slowly, people saw that as strength. One day, a merchant arrived. He came from a nearby town, word of the village's recovery reaching ears beyond the valley. He brought spices, tools, cloth, and stories. Stories of markets reopening, of festivals being planned again, of alliances being formed between communities who, just months ago, had shut their gates and buried their dead. It felt unreal, like hearing about another world. But it stirred something in the village, a restlessness, a curiosity. Thomas listened carefully as the merchant spoke around the fire, watched the flicker of excitement in the eyes of the younger villagers. For the first time, they weren't only thinking about survival, but about growth, about connection, about life beyond their narrow borders. He sat by his sister later that night, both of them sipping nettle tea, the stars burning bright above. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" she asked. "All the time," he said, "but I never wanted it until recently." She smiled, the firelight painting soft shadows on her face. "Then maybe it's time we look." The idea lingered, not as an escape, but as a step forward. A few weeks later, Thomas and a small group of villagers, chosen for their knowledge, their skills, and frankly, their curiosity, set out to visit the merchant's town. It was 2 days' travel by foot, through hills and over rivers. The journey itself felt like something from a story. Birds sang louder, the wind smelled different, the sky stretched wider. When they arrived, the town was bustling. Laughter, music, the clatter of carts, and the scent of spices and roasting meats filled the air. People from different villages, different regions, traded, argued, bartered, and shared news. It was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. Thomas didn't speak much that first day. He just watched, listened, learned. That night, in a small rented room above a bakery, he wrote down everything he'd seen. Ideas sparked like flint on steel, rotating crop schedules, shared grain storage, herbal exchanges, basic medicine training between settlements, a network. By the time they returned to the village, Thomas had a plan. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. They started small, trade agreements with one neighboring village, then another, exchange of seeds, shared calendars for harvest, eventually rotating healers who could offer help across the valley. The council called it the Quiet Revolution, because no one marched, no one shouted, but everything changed. Over the next few months, their little village became something more. A hub, a meeting place, a symbol. People came not just to trade goods, but to trade ideas, to learn how this once stricken place had become a pillar of hope. And through it all, Thomas remained grounded. He still worked the fields, still helped his sister carry buckets from the stream, still mended fences when they broke, but he also dreamed. Bigger now, not just of surviving the next season, but of building something that could last generations, of a future where his children and their children would only read about the fever in old journals and stories by the fire, a future born from pain, but built on purpose. And in the heart of that future stood a village that refused to break, and a young man who learned that leadership wasn't about command. It was about care and never stopping. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Thomas stepped out of his cottage, the morning dew still clinging to the grass beneath his feet. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of blooming wildflowers and freshly tilled soil. It was a new day, one that held the promise of progress and the weight of responsibility. In the months since the village had begun its recovery, Thomas had found himself at the heart of its transformation. His leadership during the darkest days had not gone unnoticed, and now he was a member of the village council, working alongside the elders to rebuild their community. The council had convened early that morning to discuss the upcoming harvest festival, a tradition that had been suspended during the plague years. Bringing it back was more than a nod to the past. It was a declaration of resilience, a statement that life, though altered, would continue. As Thomas walked towards the meeting hall, he passed by neighbors tending to their gardens, children chasing each other with carefree laughter, and artisans displaying their crafts. The village was alive in a way it hadn't been in years, and each smile he encountered reaffirmed his commitment to its future. Inside the hall, the council members were already deep in discussion. Elder Miriam, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, was outlining the logistics of the festival, allocating resources, organizing entertainment, and ensuring safety measures were in place. "We must remember," she said, her voice firm, "that while we celebrate, we also honor those we've lost. Their absence is felt deeply, and this festival should be a tribute to their memory as much as it is a celebration of our survival." Thomas nodded in agreement. "Perhaps we could have a moment of silence before the festivities begin, and a memorial display where families can place tokens or messages." The council murmured their approval, and the discussion shifted to other matters: food supplies, security, and inviting neighboring villages to join in the celebration. The idea of extending an olive branch to nearby communities was met with enthusiasm. Unity had become a cornerstone of their recovery. After the meeting, Thomas made his way to the village square, envisioning where the festival stalls would stand, where musicians would play, and where children would dance. He imagined the square filled with color, laughter, and the aroma of roasted meats and sweet pastries. His reverie was interrupted by the sound of hammering. Turning, he saw a group of young men constructing a stage. Among them was his friend, Jacob, who waved him over. "Thomas," Jacob called out, "come lend a hand. This stage won't build itself." Grinning, Thomas rolled up his sleeves and joined them, the camaraderie and shared purpose invigorating. As they worked, they exchanged stories, jokes, and plans for the festival. The sense of community was palpable, each nail driven into the wood a testament to their collective determination. As the days passed, preparations continued in earnest. The village buzzed with activity. Banners were painted, recipes were tested, and rehearsals for performances echoed through the streets. Thomas found himself involved in every aspect, from coordinating with neighboring villages to ensuring that the memorial display was thoughtfully arranged. On the eve of the festival, the village gathered for a final meeting. Elder Miriam addressed the crowd, her eyes shining with pride. "Tomorrow, we celebrate not just the harvest, but the strength and unity that have brought us here. Let us honor our past, embrace our present, and look forward to a future filled with hope." The following morning, the village square transformed into a vibrant tapestry of colors, sounds, and scents. Stalls overflowed with goods, musicians played lively tunes, and laughter filled the air. At the center stood the memorial display, adorned with flowers, candles, and heartfelt messages. As the sun reached its zenith, Thomas took the stage. He looked out at the faces of his fellow villagers, each one a survivor, a testament to resilience. Today, we honor those we've lost and celebrate the strength that binds us. This festival is a symbol of our journey, from despair to hope, from isolation to unity. Let it remind us that together we can overcome any adversity. The crowd erupted in applause and the festivities continued long into the night. As stars dotted the sky, Thomas stood at the edge of the square, watching the joy unfold. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that the village was not just surviving, it was thriving. In that moment, he understood that leadership wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about service, compassion, and the unwavering belief in a better tomorrow. And as the first notes of a familiar tune drifted through the air, Thomas joined the dance, his heart light, his spirit renewed, and his eyes set firmly on the future. The morning after the council meeting, the village hummed with energy. It wasn't the kind of frantic, fearful buzz that once came with sickbeds and hurried prayers, but something steadier, fuller. Hope had returned, and this time it wore the face of preparation. The harvest festival was coming. It hadn't been held in 3 years, not since the fever came and stole not just breath, but rhythm. It took away more than lives. It paused traditions, fractured bonds, buried joy. But now, with the fields full, the barns stocked, and the people healing, the council, led in no small part by Thomas, had decided it was time to bring it back. Not to forget, but to remember and rebuild. Thomas had never organized a festival before. He wasn't even sure where to start, but as with most things in the village, he learned by doing. His first order of business was walking the square at sunrise, taking stock of what they had and what they needed. Colorful cloths were pulled from dusty chests. Musicians, long silent, pulled out flutes and fiddles. Children were already practicing their dances, turning cartwheels in the grass with mud on their knees and joy in their hearts. It was going to happen, one way or another. By the third day, the square was filled with scaffolding for booths. Bakers promised loaves of spiced rye. Hunters prepared smoked meat. The weavers were creating a ribbon canopy to hang above the square. Everyone contributed something. Even the shy boy who rarely spoke was helping string lanterns along the rooftops. And Thomas? He was everywhere. One moment, hauling planks to stabilize a stage. The next, meeting with the herbalist to plan a memorial garden. He barely slept, but he didn't care. Every hammer strike, every nail, every lantern was a step toward something they all needed. Closure, yes, but also celebration. Then came the night before. Thomas sat beside the small fire outside his home. His sister joined him, handing him a warm mug of mint tea. The moon was high, glowing soft and white like it approved of all their effort. "You look exhausted," she said with a grin. "I feel exhausted," he replied, chuckling. "But I think we're ready." They sipped in silence for a bit. Then she spoke again, her voice gentler. "Do you remember last year's harvest? We couldn't even eat together." "I remember," he said quietly. "We took turns, couldn't risk spreading anything. But this year," she smiled, "we'll dance." That word dance hit him harder than he expected. He'd forgotten what dancing even felt like. Music, movement, the joy of it. And tomorrow, it was coming back. When morning came, the sun rose fast and warm. For the first time in months, there were no clouds, no wind, just light, soft and golden, drenching everything in a gentle promise. This day is yours. By noon, the village was transformed. Booths stood proudly. Banners waved. The air smelled of bread and roasting meat and honey-glazed apples. Children ran wild. Old folks found shady corners and compared gossip with smiles. And then, as the sun began to dip low, the crowd gathered in the center. A small platform had been built near the well, surrounded by candles and garlands. This would be the opening ceremony. The music stopped. Silence swept the crowd. Thomas stepped forward. He didn't need to shout. When he spoke, people listened. 3 years ago, we didn't know if we'd make it to this day, he said. There were nights when we thought it would all disappear, our homes, our traditions, even our hope. He paused. Around him, people nodded. Tears welled in quiet eyes. But we're still here, and we're not just surviving, we're living. Applause erupted, loud and long. When the music started again, it was different, not background noise, but something powerful, something alive. The first song was slow, respectful. A circle formed. People held hands. Names were spoken. A quiet moment of gratitude for those who couldn't be there. Then the tempo changed. Someone started clapping, someone else laughed, and the dancing began. Thomas didn't remember the last time he danced. His body was stiff, awkward at first, but then he let go. He let the rhythm lead. He spun his sister, grinning like a fool, watching her twirl in the soft light. All around them, life had returned. As night fell, lanterns lit up the square like stars had descended just for them. Tables groaned under the weight of food, cups clinked, voices rose. It was everything they had missed and more. Later that night, Thomas stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. He felt a hand on his shoulder. The elder. "You've done something important here," the old man said. Thomas shook his head. "We did this, all of us." The elder nodded. "But someone had to believe first." And that was it. Not a grand ending, but a beginning. Because from that day forward, the village was different. Not just because of what they had endured, but because of what they had built, together. And in the flickering lantern light, Thomas knew they wouldn't just be remembered for surviving the plague. They'd be remembered for learning how to live again. The morning after the harvest festival arrived like a sigh, gentle, quiet, and a little too bright for the heads still fogged by wine and dance. The village, still carrying traces of laughter and flickering lantern light, looked like it had been gently shaken by a dream. Leftover ribbons clung to tree branches. Stray petals scattered across cobblestone paths. Somewhere, a rooster crowed late, like even it had slept in. Thomas was up before most. He walked through the square slowly, boots crunching against dried leaves and straw. It felt strange, this silence, not heavy, not sorrowful, just calm. The kind that follows something good, something needed. The square still smelled of cinnamon bread and roasted meat. He passed by a table where a half-eaten pie sat forgotten, and he chuckled quietly to himself. Someone must have been pulled away mid-bite, probably to dance, maybe to kiss. He stopped at the stage. It was just planks of wood held together by rope and determination. But last night it had held stories, speeches, music, hope, and for the first time in a long time, it had held people laughing together without looking over their shoulders. "Could have used more nails," a voice behind him said. Thomas turned to see Jonah, the carpenter, carrying a coil of rope and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "It held," Thomas replied. "Barely," Jonah grinned. "But I suppose that's all anything needs to do around here lately. Just hold together." That stuck with Thomas. Hold together. That's what they'd all been doing for months. Quietly, painfully, persistently. Not flourishing, not thriving, just holding. But now, after last night, things felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding. And rebuilding meant decisions. Later that day, the council met again, this time in the shade of a massive elm tree, rather than the stuffy meeting hall. It felt right, more natural. Birds chirped above them, children played nearby, and in the center sat the people tasked with guiding the village forward. "There's an idea on the table," the elder began, "that we begin reaching out, properly this time. Trade, yes, but also alliances. Shared knowledge, roads." Thomas leaned forward. He'd been waiting for this conversation. "We're stronger together," he said. "The fever isolated us, understandably, but it also taught us how fragile that isolation is. Next time, if there is a next time, we need friends." Murmurs of agreement. "I say we send a delegation," another voice chimed in. Marta, the herbalist, her arms crossed confidently. "Other villages are healing too. We could learn from each other." Thomas nodded. "I volunteer." The room quieted. It wasn't surprise. It was understanding. Of course he'd volunteer. That's who he had become. Preparations began the next morning. The journey wouldn't be long. 3 days through winding roads, past the river over a small ridge, but it hadn't been taken since before the sickness. Maps were redrawn. Packs were filled with dried meat, water, parchment, ink, and small tokens of goodwill. Woven scarves, jars of honey, preserved herbs. Thomas chose 3 companions: Jonah for his craftsmanship, Marta for her knowledge of remedies and diplomacy, and Ellen, a young scribe with a memory sharp as flint and a tongue even sharper. Before they left, the village gathered again, not to celebrate, but to bless. It was quiet, solemn, not out of fear but respect. Hands touched shoulders, hugs were given, a few tears. Thomas knelt by his sister before departing. She placed a hand on his cheek. "Come back with more stories," she said, smiling softly. "But not too many. I want to be able to fall asleep." He laughed, kissed her forehead, and stood. Then they were off. The road welcomed them like an old friend, dusty, familiar, winding. The trees whispered above them. Birds darted from branch to branch. There was beauty in it, so much beauty they had forgotten in the panic of survival. They spoke as they walked, not of strategy or politics, but of old jokes, shared memories, dreams. They camped beneath stars, ate by firelight, told ghost stories that made Marta roll her eyes and Jonah pretend not to flinch. On the third day, they saw it. Another village, alive. Children ran across a bridge, laundry flapped from windows, smoke rose in curling lines from chimneys. They were greeted cautiously, but warmly. News of their visit had somehow preceded them. A boy had run ahead from a trading outpost. Word traveled faster than feet. Thomas stood before the village council. Different faces, but the same eyes. Tired, wise, watching. We came not just to trade goods, he said, but ideas, experiences, and peace. That night, the fire between them was communal. Two villages, once isolated, now laughing together. Thomas looked around and felt something settle in his chest. This was the beginning of a network, a web not just of trade or defense, but of humanity. And for the first time since the fever, he wasn't just hopeful, he was certain. The road home was quieter than when they had left, not for lack of words, but because of what those silences carried. A kind of peace, a confirmation. Every footstep on the dirt road felt different now, less like retreat and more like return. Thomas walked with a steady rhythm, eyes cast forward, mind racing with everything they had seen, everything they could now imagine. The village appeared through the trees just as the afternoon sun bent low, casting long shadows across the hills. Smoke drifted upward from chimneys. The scent of wood and cooking bread hit them like a memory wrapped in warmth. It felt like coming home from war, though there had been no swords, just fears and questions and the stubborn pursuit of a better future. When the gates opened, it wasn't a parade, no trumpets, no cheers. Just hands, reaching out, clasping shoulders, pulling people into tight embraces. Word had traveled ahead, as it always did. A trader had passed through the outpost and told stories of alliances, of shared grain stores, of dancing flames, and two villages speaking across old boundaries. Thomas looked around and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Confidence. The people weren't just relieved, they were proud. That night, the council called an open assembly in the central square. Lanterns were lit, benches pulled out, a fire burned in the center, low but strong. Thomas stood not as the hero, not as the savior, but as a storyteller. He described everything, the welcome they received, the conversations, the way children from both villages had played like they'd always known each other, the way hands had worked together, rebuilding a bridge, literally and metaphorically. Imagine, he said, if every village within a day's walk could share what they have. Imagine if one healer didn't have to carry the burden alone, if one field's failure meant help, not hunger. That's what's possible, and it starts with us. People listened, some with skeptical eyes, others with tears, most with a look that said they understood. They weren't just hearing his words, they were remembering what it felt like to be alone, and realizing they didn't want to feel that way again. The days that followed were a blur of planning. The council formed what they called a circle of reach, a rotation of messengers and representatives to visit surrounding settlements. Each one would carry gifts, seeds, books, stories. Jonah began building a second cart. The weavers stitched together blankets in new colors, the herbalists prepared packets labeled in multiple dialects. A map was drawn on the largest table in the meeting hall, every village they knew marked in charcoal, lines connecting them like a spider's web. And Thomas? He became the first envoy. He traveled to 3 more villages in a single month. Each time, the welcome grew warmer. They brought back tales of a village that traded wheat for timber, another that offered blacksmith training in exchange for tools, and still another that hosted a shared harvest festival that brought together 4 communities in a single meadow. At night, when he finally returned, he sat by the fire with his sister. The map spread between them. She marked each new connection with a small star. "You know what this looks like?" she asked. He smiled, leaning back on his elbows. "A constellation," he said. The village changed. Children began learning not just letters, but routes, names of neighboring leaders, how to say hello in 4 different ways. Trade fairs were planned months in advance. Disputes were settled by councils of 2 or 3 villages together, not behind closed doors. There was laughter again, but this time, it wasn't the laughter of survival. It was joy, real joy. built on community. One night, as the autumn winds picked up, Thomas stood on the edge of the village, watching a caravan disappear down the road, bound for a new settlement they'd only just discovered. He could hear the faint sound of hooves, of wheels creaking, of songs sung in travel. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. This network, this rebirth, had begun with a conversation around a fire, a belief that they were not meant to live in fear and silence, but in connection and care. He turned and walked back toward home, the stars above glimmering like the map on their table, and in his chest, something burned. Not just hope, but purpose. By the time the leaves had begun to bronze at their edges and the breeze carried the unmistakable scent of oncoming autumn, Thomas's village had become almost unrecognizable, not in structure, but in spirit. Where once there had been hesitation, now there was motion. Where silence once hung heavy like morning fog, now there was conversation. Trade routes were opening, ideas were flowing, and for the first time in recent memory, people were looking outward with hope rather than inward with fear. In the heart of it all stood Thomas, still a little surprised at how quickly things were changing. The morning after their third inter-village gathering, he awoke to the sound of wheels crunching gravel. Another cart arriving from a settlement 2 days west. On it were woven mats, firewood, and jars of preserved mushrooms exchanged for healing balms and seed potatoes. Behind it trailed a young musician who had never left her home before, eager to share the lullabies of her people. It was working. The circle was growing, but growth brought new challenges. One evening, the council met under lantern light to address the tensions beginning to stir. Not all villages were as ready for unity. Some remained suspicious, their leaders hardened by years of isolation and loss. Marta, ever cautious, tapped her fingers on the table. We must proceed with care. There's excitement, yes, but also fear. Fear of losing traditions, fear of being swallowed by something too big. Thomas nodded. We don't erase their identity, we celebrate it. These alliances aren't about sameness, they're about strength in diversity, mutual support, not uniformity. The group agreed to form a mediation team, volunteers trained to navigate disputes, to listen first and speak second. It was diplomacy, yes, but it was also humanity. The next phase began with a simple but revolutionary act, a shared calendar. Thomas and his sister, along with the scribe Ilen, traveled to 5 villages, gathering festivals, solstice observances, planting days, and harvest weeks. They mapped out a system that allowed everyone to keep their unique celebrations while finding overlap, moments where villages could come together, not just to trade, but to witness and join in. The Long Fire Festival was the first of its kind. Held at the midway point between 3 major villages, it stretched over 3 days and nights. Storytellers from one village, dancers from another, bakers from a third. A river of languages and rhythms flowed through the open field where they met. No boundaries but the tree line. Thomas stood near the edge of the gathering, watching children chase fireflies while elders exchanged advice about storing root vegetables for winter. It looked like something from a dream, something ancient and new all at once. And in that moment, he saw clearly. They weren't building a federation. They were building a culture. One stitched from stories, shared burdens, and thousands of small kindnesses. But not everyone saw it that way. 2 weeks after the festival, a messenger arrived from a distant northern village, one that had refused every offer of alliance. The note was brief and cold. Your influence is spreading too far. Do not approach our borders. The council met in private. We have to respect their boundaries, said Jonah, even if we think they're wrong. But we can't ignore them either, said Ellen. What if fear turns into hostility? Thomas leaned back, thinking, we don't force our way in, but we keep the door open. We send messages, updates, show them the benefits, the safety, the joy, and if they come around, we welcome them. No judgment. So that's what they did. A small delegation traveled near, but not into their territory. They built a tiny way station at the crossroads, stocked with food, tools, and scrolls of knowledge. A note left behind read, for any traveler in need, no price, no questions. Weeks passed. Then one night, the supplies disappeared, and in their place, a new note. Thank you. It wasn't peace, but it wasn't war. As autumn deepened, the village continued to evolve. Children now studied maps in school. Blacksmiths began forging tools with input from travelers. Songs learned at the festival were sung in fields during harvest. new words blending into old ones. And Thomas? He still walked the village every morning, still paused to talk with farmers, still watched his sister teach the youngest kids how to dry herbs and identify mushrooms, still found himself surprised by how much a single decision to connect had shifted the axis of their lives. One evening, as frost began to creep into the corners of the night, Thomas climbed the hill beyond the eastern ridge. From there, you could see lanterns flickering in two other villages, nestled in the folds of the valley. He stood there for a long time, watching the wind ripple the grass. He thought about how, just a year ago, those same hills had felt like walls. Now they were threads, tying one place to another. Below, in the heart of the village, someone began to sing. A quiet melody, low and familiar, rising into the night air. Thomas smiled. They were no longer just surviving, they were building something bigger, something lasting. And it was just the beginning. The first frost came silently, a white lacework over the rooftops and fields that made everything shimmer under the weak winter sun. It was beautiful, almost deceptively so, because with its arrival came the first real test of the new alliances they had built. Thomas stood by the East Watch Road at dawn, his coat pulled tight, hands in his pockets. The village below looked peaceful, even serene, blanketed in silver, but he wasn't looking at the beauty. He was watching for the smoke from the far ridge, smoke that would mean help was needed. And then it came. A thin trail of gray curling skyward from the trees. Not from a chimney, from a signal fire. They had agreed on it weeks ago. 1 puff for travelers, 2 for traders, 3 for distress. There were 3. Within minutes, the council was awake and gathered. Boots on, maps rolled out, everyone moved with practiced coordination. No panic, just purpose. "It's the Northern Pass village," said Aelin, the scribe, "the one near the river bend. Could be flooding, could be wolves, could be worse." Thomas nodded. "Either way, we go." The caravan left within the hour. 2 carts filled with blankets, dried goods, medicine, and lumber. 8 villagers volunteered without hesitation. This was the future they had committed to. Not just words and charters, but action. When one suffered, the others responded. The trail was frozen, narrow in places. Branches cracked underfoot. No one spoke much. Breath puffed out like smoke. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of snow. When they reached the village at sunset, the problem was clear. The main bridge had collapsed, cutting off supply routes and endangering homes near the river. Water now lapped just feet from several foundations. Families had already moved into shared shelters. Children sat wrapped in blankets, wide-eyed and cold. The leader of the village met them with disbelief in his eyes. "You actually came?" Thomas smiled. "We said we would." They got to work. The next 48 hours were a blur of hammering, hauling, sawing, and problem-solving. Fires were built, food distributed, children entertained while adults rebuilt. Jonah designed a temporary support for the bridge using felled trees. Marta treated a half-dozen cases of frostbite and 2 infected wounds. Ilan, with ink-stained fingers and wind-chapped cheeks, helped draft a long-term supply-sharing pact before they left. On the 3rd day, as they prepared to return, the village elder pulled Thomas aside. "You saved lives," the man said, voice thick with emotion. "Not just from the cold, from hopelessness. We didn't believe anyone would come." Thomas didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and offered his hand. Back home, the returning party was greeted like heroes. Not with cheers, but with food, warmth, and grateful silence. That's how this village showed its love, in presence, not performance. Around the fire that night, Thomas sat with his sister, watching the flames flicker. "You remember when we were scared just to go to the next field?" she asked, handing him a mug of warm cider. "Yeah," he said. "Now we're building bridges, literally and figuratively." She laughed. "You're getting good at those council speeches." He smirked. "I might have stolen that one from Jonah." The winter deepened. Snow piled high, roads froze, but never once did they feel alone. Caravans still came, sometimes small, sometimes delayed, but they came. People arrived with news, songs, letters, and even new ideas for windproof insulation shared from mountain folk farther west. And in the quietest nights, when wind howled and windows rattled, the village stayed warm, not just because of firewood, but because of connection. In early February, a young traveler arrived with a message from a once isolated settlement to the far north, the one that had sent the cold letter warning Thomas not to cross their borders. The message was short. We're ready to talk." The council couldn't believe it. "They saw," Marta said. "They saw the bridge. They saw what happened and what didn't." "They saw we didn't leave anyone behind," Thomas added. So a new delegation was formed, one of cautious hands and hopeful hearts. Before they left, Thomas addressed the village. "This began because we believed fear didn't have to define us, that trust was still possible, that strangers could become friends, and we were right. But this next step, it's even harder, because welcoming someone after rejection requires more than trust. It requires grace." They left with no guarantees, but they left anyway. Because that's what hope does. It moves, it reaches, it builds, and it doesn't stop just because the air gets cold. The snow had settled deeper now, layering rooftops and treetops with thick pillows of white. What once would have meant isolation, risk, and fear was now just weather. The kind you prepare for with warm stew, extra firewood, and stories shared close to the hearth. Thomas walked through the village as the wind tugged playfully at his coat. He passed the bakery where steam fogged the windows and the smell of honey bread hung in the air. Children chased one another around bundled adults carrying sacks of grain and jars of dried herbs. And though the snow muffled sound, the village still buzzed with quiet purpose. The council was meeting again that afternoon, this time not for a crisis, but something bigger. A vote to formalize what they had all been doing instinctively for months. They were no longer just helping neighbors, they were building something resembling a union. They called it the Confederation of Valleys. It wasn't grand, not yet. There were no crests, no castles, no trumpets. But there was a draft charter, penned by Ellen and edited by the scribes from 2 other villages. There were messengers waiting at borders, and elders from distant ridges who had made the journey through sleet just to be part of the conversation. As Thomas entered the meeting hall, the energy inside was palpable. Marta stood at the front, parchment in hand. "We propose that each village maintain its own council and customs, but we'll form a shared assembly, one that meets quarterly to address trade, safety, and shared infrastructure." Jonah chimed in, "We'll contribute labor or resources depending on what's needed. No village will be left to starve or freeze because of a bad season, and disputes will be mediated by neutral parties from other members." There were nods, hesitant at first, then firm. One elder from the far western border, a man named Damaris, raised his hand. "And how do we protect ourselves from those who don't wish us well? Not every settlement wants unity." Thomas stepped forward. "That's why we stand together," he said simply. "If one of us is threatened, the others come. Not with weapons first, but with presence, with numbers, with witness. If we show up before violence, we reduce the need for it." Silence followed. Then a soft voice, "That's never been done before." Thomas smiled. "That's why we do it now." By sunset, it was unanimous. The charter was signed, not with ink alone, but with handshakes, embraces, and cups of warm cider passed between strangers. That night, as the snow fell in thick, slow spirals, the village held a feast. Not a celebration of victory, but of beginning. Tables lined the square, covered in food brought from across the valley. Root stew, dried apples, smoked fish wrapped in leaves. Musicians played fiddles and drums. Children danced between benches. Old rivals laughed over mulled wine. Thomas stood at the edge of it all, watching. This was bigger than his village now. Bigger than the fever. Bigger than the fear. This was resilience, not as endurance, but as connection. Resilience as something shared. His sister joined him, handing him a mug of spiced tea. "I remember when you were scared to talk in front of 10 people, she teased. "I still am," he grinned. "But apparently, I'll do it anyway." They watched as a little girl from a mountain village taught 2 boys from the river valley a new dance. A woman from the eastern pines traded wool socks for fireglass beads. And somewhere, at the center of it all, the idea of us was stretching, expanding, redefining what community could mean. In the days that followed, small changes began to snowball. Villages coordinated planting schedules to avoid redundancy. Traveling teachers began circuit routes. Emergency stores of grain and medicine were moved to central caches. And perhaps most beautiful of all, letters started appearing. Not official scrolls or decrees, but real letters. Between kids, between craftspeople, between people who now, across the snow and silence, cared for one another. One letter read, "Your story about the night of the fire made me cry. I told my brother, he said, we'll build better roofs together next spring. Another, we tried your stew recipe. My mother added her own herbs. She says we should all cook together next moon. Thomas kept them all, folded neatly in a wooden box beside his bed. He read them sometimes when the world felt heavy. Because no matter what the next season brought, these words reminded him, connection had taken root. One morning, a hawk arrived from a southern village with a message tied to its leg. It simply read, "We heard what you're doing. We want in." And Thomas smiled because they had started something worth spreading, not just a network, not just a system, but a way of living together. The first thaw came slowly, quietly. It didn't announce itself with grand gestures or sudden warmth, but with the soft drip of snow melting from rooftops and the gentle creak of trees waking from their frozen sleep. The days grew longer, the sun a little bolder, and with every passing hour, the village shifted, not just in weather, but in rhythm, in attitude. Spring had arrived, and with it a new chapter for the Confederation of Valleys. By now, the alliance was more than just a hopeful experiment. It was becoming a way of life, a tapestry woven from stories, agreements, and the shared memory of hard winters survived together. Thomas could see it in the way children from different villages now played without distinction. He heard it in the laughter at the weekly open markets. He felt it in the letters that arrived by hawk or by hand, notes filled with gratitude, invitations, or even just jokes scribbled on bark. But with growth came responsibility. One morning, as Thomas walked through the bustling square, past the bakers, the traders, the musicians, he was stopped by a young boy holding a folded parchment. "It's from the southern ridge," the boy said, eyes wide. "They're asking for help." Thomas took the letter. The ink was hurried, the message clear. A fire had swept through the lower slopes, destroying homes and grain stores. Dozens displaced, supplies low, spirits lower. There was no debate. By sunset, 3 carts were loaded with lumber, food, and blankets. A 4th carried tools and medicine, and a 5th, led by Thomas himself, carried volunteers. As they traveled south, the land changed. Trees grew taller, the wind sharper. When they reached the village, it was worse than they had feared. Ash still clung to the air. Foundations smoldered. The people moved like shadows, eyes hollowed by loss. But what followed was something extraordinary. Neighbors from 4 other villages arrived over the next 2 days. Caravans rolled in from every direction. Builders, healers, cooks, storytellers, children who sang to lift heavy hearts. Within a week, the southern ridge was no longer a site of devastation. It was a living symbol of what unity could accomplish. And when they left behind more than rebuilt homes. They left behind hope. Back home, Thomas called a summit. Not just a council meeting, but a gathering of every village in the Confederation. They held it in the newly completed Hall of Commons, a grand building made of timber, stone, and glass, sourced and crafted by hands from every corner of the Alliance. At its center hung a circular table. No head, no hierarchy, only room for every voice that stood before the assembly. The fire at Southern Ridge reminded us, he said, that resilience isn't just the ability to endure, it's the ability to respond, to act, together. Marta spoke next. She proposed a rotating emergency response team, villagers trained not just in first aid and logistics, but in communication and diplomacy. Jonah suggested a central repository of knowledge, a shared archive of building techniques, farming innovations, and traditional wisdom from every region. Ellen, always poetic, called for a festival of first light, an annual event to honor beginnings, of spring, of peace, of unity. The proposals were met with applause, discussion, and finally unanimous approval. But something more powerful was happening beneath the surface. Villages that had once eyed each other with suspicion now exchanged family recipes. Old rivalries had melted like snow and sun. Young people began traveling between communities, not as outsiders, but as citizens of something larger. A shared identity was forming, and that identity had roots. In the weeks that followed, the Confederation implemented its first official code of principles, drafted by a group of scribes, farmers, and elders. It wasn't just about trade and aid, it was about values, respect, honesty, hospitality, curiosity. Copies were distributed, not as mandates, but as invitations. "This is who we are," the cover read, "and who we choose to be." Spring rolled into early summer. The valleys bloomed, so did the relationships. A child born in one village had three godparents from three different corners of the Confederation. A traveling theater troupe performed plays in multiple dialects, and in one unprecedented moment, two villages, historical enemies, announced a joint project to build a library between their borders. Thomas stood at the groundbreaking ceremony, moved almost to tears. He wasn't a king, not a leader in any traditional sense. He didn't command armies or hold titles, but he had helped light a fire. And that fire, unlike the one that destroyed, was the kind that warmed. It was spreading, not like a blaze, but like sunlight, and the people, his people, were learning to walk in it together. Summer had reached its peak. The fields glowed gold under the sun, the rivers ran wide and warm, and the roads connecting the villages bustled with carts, laughter, and the rhythm of hooves and wheels. It was a season not just of warmth, but of affirmation, proof that what they had built was working, that cooperation could outlast crisis, that trust could stretch across hills and languages. Thomas walked through the square of his village and saw faces he didn't recognize, and that was a good thing now. Travelers from distant communities stopped here to trade, to learn, to rest. There was a boy from the eastern hills reciting poetry beside a stall selling fish smoked in the Western style. There was a seamstress from the north teaching children how to dye cloth using flower petals. There were old men swapping tools, young women discussing carpentry techniques, and a dog that had somehow become a local celebrity just by following every cart that passed through. This, Thomas thought, this was what peace looked like. But peace, as always, is not a thing you earn once. It is a garden, and gardens need tending. That month, a small but troubling pattern emerged. Reports from border villages mentioned scouts, strangers with weapons, marks of a crest they didn't recognize. Traders whispered of a new group forming beyond the outer ridge. They weren't bandits, they weren't a kingdom, but they were something, and that something didn't like what the Confederation stood for. At the next summit, held under the great oak at the heart of the Central Plains, the tone was more serious than usual. "They call themselves the Iron Hand," said Marta, her voice firm. "No formal territory yet, but they're gathering strength, and they're watching us." Jonah leaned forward. "They think we're weak because we govern by consensus, because we don't have kings or crowns." Thomas replied, "They mistake kindness for softness, but we've survived plague, fire, famine, and we've done it together. They may have swords, but we have something sharper." "What's that?" someone asked. Thomas smiled. "Memory and momentum." The council agreed on two measures. First, every village would appoint a nightstone, a person trained to report any signs of trouble quickly and accurately. Second, they would expand the peacekeeping patrols, not as an army, but as a presence, a reminder that the Confederation was watching too. But they didn't stop there. Rather than retreat into fear, the Confederation decided to hold a gathering unlike any before. They called it the Day of Many Fires, a single night where, across every village, bonfires would be lit in unison. People would sing the same songs, tell the same stories, share meals by firelight to declare, without borders or speeches, we are one. On the evening of the festival, Thomas stood on the ridge above his village. As dusk fell, the first fires sparked in the east, then the north, then the west, until the entire valley was dotted with flickering orange light. From above, it looked like a constellation had fallen to earth. He closed his eyes and listened. Laughter, flutes, feet stomping in dance, children shouting rhymes. It wasn't defiance, it was joy. Joy as resistance, joy as declaration. And it worked. The Iron Hand didn't vanish, but they paused. Maybe they understood that this was not a land ripe for conquest. Maybe they simply didn't know how to fight something built on love. The rest of the summer passed without incident. But Thomas knew the real danger would never be swords. It would be forgetting. Forgetting how far they'd come. Forgetting that unity wasn't the default. It was the choice they had to make again and again. So he wrote. He wrote down everything. The meetings, the stories, the songs, the lessons. With Ellen's help, he began compiling the first Confederation Chronicle, a record not just of what had happened, but of how, of why, for the next generation and the one after that, because peace doesn't just grow, it must be taught, and it must be remembered. The sharpness in the morning air returned like a familiar whisper. Autumn had crept in slowly, stealthily, painting the valleys in shades of rust and fire. The heat of summer had passed, But the warmth in the hearts of the Confederation's people hadn't faded. In fact, it was stronger than ever. And now, with the turning of the season, came a new celebration, one that hadn't existed just a year before. They called it the Festival of Fire and Grain. It began as an idea around the council table, a simple gesture meant to mark the end of the harvest. But it grew, the way good ideas do, fed by enthusiasm, carried by storytellers, and shaped by a dozen different villages adding their own flavor. Now, in every community from the Eastern Pines to the Western Ridge, preparations were underway. Markets were decorated with ribbons made from dyed cloth, stages were built from reclaimed wood, fire pits were dug and filled with stacked kindling, and at the center of every square, a tall wooden post wrapped in twine and ivy stood waiting to be lit, a beacon not of warning, but of gratitude. Thomas walked through his village with a calm pride. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of a people who had learned the value of leaning in rather than pulling away. A group of children rehearsed a play based on the first night of the Confederation. A potter from the north traded clay bowls for spiced pears. A goat bleated cheerfully as it was led through the crowd by a laughing teenager in embroidered boots. But there was also something deeper in the air this year, something earned. Because now, this celebration wasn't just about food or music. It was about memory. The memory of a hard winter, of fire and loss, of rebuilding, of people coming not because they were ordered, but because they chose to. This was the first true ritual born of the Confederation, and rituals, as Ellen once said, are how we turn pain into wisdom. By midday, the village was alive with noise and movement. Cooks stirred massive pots of stew, the smell of roasted garlic and herbs curling through the air. Musicians tuned lutes, flutes, and fiddles. Elders sat in circles, telling stories of their youth, while toddlers danced in circles nearby, mimicking the gestures of old legends. And yet, even as joy filled the air, there were reminders of vigilance. The patrols had returned 2 days earlier with news. The Iron Hand had moved further north, regrouping, recruiting. They hadn't attacked, hadn't even crossed into Confederation lands, but they were watching, waiting. That knowledge didn't ruin the festival, but it gave it weight. It reminded everyone that joy, too, is an act of defiance. As the sun began to set, the square filled. Villagers and visitors alike crowded around the central post. Elin took the stage, her presence commanding yet gentle. This time last year, she said, her voice rising like wind over hills, we were different. Not because we lacked courage, but because we hadn't yet proven what we could be. Tonight, we celebrate not just the harvest, but the hard choices we've made, the ones that bound us, shaped us, and saved us. She looked to Thomas, who stepped forward with a small torch lit from the hearth of his home, the oldest in the village. He held it to the post. The ivy caught first, then the twine. Flames licked upward, crackling, dancing. Cheers erupted, not wild or chaotic, but deep, heartfelt. A sound of shared survival. One by one, other fires were lit throughout the valley. From hilltops to riversides, light bloomed like stars awakening. It was visible from every edge of the Confederation. Even the most distant villages had synchronized their fire to this moment. A signal across darkness. A signal that said, we are still here. As the night deepened, the dancing began. Circles spun, hands joined, feet stomped. Plates were passed, songs were sung in 3 dialects at once. Someone told a joke about goats and windmills that made even the stone-faced blacksmith laugh until he cried. And through it all, the fire burned steady. Later, after the songs quieted and the little ones slept under blankets near the fire's edge, Thomas sat beside his sister near the embers. She passed him a mug of cider. You know, she said softly, when I was a girl, I used to think safety meant walls, gates, locks. Thomas nodded, sipping slowly. And now? Now I think it means people who show up when it's hard, who remember your name even when you forget your own. They didn't speak for a while, just watched the fire. In that moment, the weight of what they'd built settled on Thomas, not as a burden, but as a mantle. The Confederation was no longer an idea. It was a people, a place, a promise. And tomorrow, as they cleaned up ash and folded banners, they would begin again. Because that's how peace is kept. Not by grand speeches, but by staying, by showing up, by lighting the next fire. The embers of the Festival of Fire and Grain had barely cooled when the first whispers of winter began to rustle through the valley. Leaves, once vibrant in hues of gold and crimson, now carpeted the ground, crunching beneath the boots of villagers preparing for the colder months ahead. The Confederation of Valleys, forged through shared trials and triumphs, stood resilient, its bonds stronger than ever. Thomas stood atop the ridge overlooking the village, the crisp air carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the distant laughter of children. Below, preparations were underway for the upcoming winter solstice celebration, a tradition newly embraced by the Confederation, drawing inspiration from ancient customs and the collective spirit of the allied villages. Ellen, ever the historian, had delved into the archives, unearthing tales of medieval winter festivals that once brought communities together in the face of the year's darkest days. She spoke of the Feast of St. Martin, where villagers would gather to share the season's bounty, and of the lighting of bonfires to ward off the encroaching darkness. These stories resonated deeply, offering a sense of continuity and connection to those who had come before. In the weeks leading up to the solstice, each village contributed to the preparations. Artisans crafted intricate lanterns to line the pathways, bakers experimented with recipes passed down through generations, and musicians composed melodies that blended traditional motifs with contemporary flair. The collaborative effort mirrored the Confederation's ethos: unity through diversity. As the longest night approached, anticipation grew. Villagers from across the Confederation journeyed to the central square, braving the chill to partake in the festivities. The square, illuminated by the warm glow of countless lanterns, pulsed with life. Stalls offered spiced cider and roasted chestnuts, while performers captivated audiences with tales of heroism and hope. At the heart of the celebration stood a towering bonfire, its flames dancing against the star-strewn sky. Thomas, joined by Ellen and representatives from each village, approached the fire and carrying with them symbols of their communities: a sheaf of wheat, a carved wooden figure, a woven tapestry. One by one, they placed these offerings into the fire, a gesture of gratitude and a pledge of continued unity. As the flames consumed the tokens, Ellen stepped forward, her voice clear and resonant. She spoke of the journey they'd undertaken, the challenges overcome, and the strength found in solidarity. Her words, steeped in the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future, stirred the hearts of all present. The celebration continued deep into the night, with music, dance, and shared stories weaving a tapestry of communal joy. In the warmth of the firelight, strangers became friends, and the Confederation's ideals were reaffirmed. As dawn broke, casting a golden hue over the valley, Thomas reflected on the night's events. The winter solstice, once a time of uncertainty, had been transformed into a beacon of hope and unity. Through shared traditions and collective effort, the Confederation of Valleys had not only preserved the past, but had also forged a brighter path forward. In the days that followed, the spirit of the solstice lingered. Villagers returned to their homes, carrying with them the warmth of shared memories and the knowledge that together they could weather any storm. The Confederation, born of necessity, had evolved into a testament to the enduring power of community. And so, as the first snowflakes of winter descended upon the valley, they did not bring with them a sense of dread, but rather a quiet confidence. For in the heart of the Confederation of Valleys, the fires of unity burned bright, illuminating the path through the darkest of nights. Before we let the night tuck us in, we'd love to hear from you. What part of today's story spoke to you the most? Was it the unity born from ashes? The quiet courage of Thomas? Or maybe that one stubborn goat with a flair for festivals? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Whether it's a cozy apartment in Paris, a farmhouse in Iowa, or somewhere in between, we'd love to know where our village reaches. If this story lit even the smallest spark in your imagination, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've got more tales coming, ones full of grit, mystery, and yes, maybe even another heroic goose or two. Your support helps us keep the fire going, sharing forgotten history, strange truths, and soft-spoken epics just before you drift off to sleep. Thank you for spending part of your night with us. Until tomorrow, may your blankets be heavy, your dreams be vivid, and your village, wherever it may be, feel just a little closer. Good night. See you in the next story.